Fatal Frame 3 is a third-person horror adventure where you snap pictures of ghosts with the camera obscura to exorcise them. The game follows Ray and her friends as they travel into the Manor of Sleep after being drawn there by an accident. Atmosphere. I love the atmosphere in this game. It's very different to the previous entries in the way that it makes you feel. It's the same decrepit Japanese dwellings and darkened corridors, but the Manor of Sleep's atmosphere is much more dreamlike and unearthly. Every night you go to sleep and you're welcomed by a foreboding cutscene before you awaken there. There's a feeling of melancholic loneliness, but there's also a lot of sinister things around you. You can hear strained groaning coming from behind doors and see strange human-shaped shadows on the walls and a human hand poking out, but some areas are so intense they inflict dread nearly instantly. The narrow crawl spaces under the manor were some of the most nerve-wracking moments in the entire game. You knew something bad was going to happen, you just had to wait for it. Following in the tradition from the other games, the subject matter of rituals and sacrifices hangs over the events as well, which makes certain things all the more horrifying and sad. Fatal Frame has always had great atmosphere, and this one is no different. That's one Harry Mason. Scares. The game does such an excellent job with atmosphere and tension building and really delivers some interesting scares, but most of them I felt happened in Ray's house as opposed to the Manor of Sleep. Ray can of course wake up from her nightmare, and when she does, she's free to explore her house. To begin with, it's a haven of melancholic peace between the nightmares, but after a while it's just as bad, if not worse, than the ghosts in her dreams. There's a lot of really subtle things that work incredibly well to creep the player out, but it's the shock value of having a safe place invaded and feeling helpless to stop it. Since you don't wield the camera obscura in the waking world, you feel almost completely helpless against the spirits in your own home. In the Manor of Sleep, things are pretty business as usual. I don't find the ghosts as creepy this time, but there are some excellent moments where they catch you off guard. Something that doesn't work very well, I felt, was the inclusion of the tattooed priestess, who is vital to the story and therefore can't be killed, but will follow you through several rooms chasing you away from whatever goal you were trying to reach. I didn't find her frightening, and she was fairly annoying when she cropped up, meaning I'd have to leave the area. Other than that though, the game certainly got its fair share of jumps out of me. That's 2 Harry Masons. Sound design. This has to be my favourite soundtrack of any horror game I've played. There's some wonderfully weird and moody pieces, organic, hazy synths and weird samples play with ghostly voices and whispers that echo throughout the tracks. They all contribute to the dreamlike feeling of the game heavily. It also includes pieces from the first 2 Fatal Frame games as well, which are both fantastic. The cassette tapes always have multiple voices on them, like you're listening to an EVP on top of the voice being recorded, which is pretty spooky. There's a lot of subtle ambience like the rain in Ray's house to add to the mood of the place. The voice acting is pretty good, and the sound effects and 3D audio is implemented really well, especially when searching for ghosts with the camera obscura. You can hear where they are. My only gripe is that certain voice lines are repeated over and over until you engage the ghost speaking them, which makes it all a bit robotic and ruins immersion for me a little bit. But overall, it's stellar stuff. That's 3 Harry Masons. Gore. There's lots of blood splatters in specific parts of the game which make those parts stand out due to the overall lack of colour. These games aren't usually about gore, and what is there is handled well. That's 4 Harry Masons. Story. Rei Kurosara, a freelance photographer, snaps a picture of her deceased boyfriend in an abandoned house and finds herself exploring a haunted manor in her dreams. Fatal Frame 3 includes a lot of the same ritualistic folklore tales to make the other games so intriguing, and even tries to tie up the events of the previous games into its story. I found a lot of it easier to digest this time round, but there are more diary entries than ever, with Rei being able to develop photographs from her dream and getting her assistant Miku, who was the protagonist from the first game, to research them and give you backstory for stuff. A lot of this was totally fascinating, and it felt like nearly everything was explained, which was great considering how interesting the weird events and certain aspects of the story are. Maybe it depends on the ending you get, but I did feel like certain parts of the plot weren't wrapped up, and it left me wanting to know what happened to certain characters, but overall the story was pretty damn good, making the final score 5 out of 5 Harry Masons. The game may have scored well, but the biggest flaw it has is probably its size and gameplay. Whilst at its core it's still photographing ghosts, many of the chapters require you to do a lot of tedious tasks like finding multiple items or photographing multiple ghosts in an area the size of a small town. The Manor of Sleep is immense and tacks on areas from the first and second game too, which makes the map gigantic. The constant backtracking dragged the game out, and if it wasn't so good at what it did, it would have been a real drag to play. Again, I'd like to remind you this whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out though I was horrified in the crawl space. I did not scream like a banshee or run away from the computer. I advise you don't either. There are more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. And always go check out Bumps in the middle of the night. Peace.